This conference will now be recorded.
And so I'm welcoming everybody to the Fish and Wildlife Area and Habitat Workshop. This is going to be a little bit more like a laboratory and less like a series of presentations, which is a little bit different than what we've been doing. It may be a little bit more interactive and maybe a little bit more challenging because of the remote access. However, we are attempting to deliver a meaningful activity that will assist our CAC members with refining and creating goals and policies that reflect the community's values and statewide planning goals. And I just want to tell you that staff appreciates everyone's support and everyone's hard work. And literally, we cannot do this without you. So I appreciate everyone being here. I'm Julia Decker. I'm the planning manager. And so, as I said, this is a little bit more lab style than any format we've used in the past. CAC members will be working on reviewing the existing goals and policies and refining them or devising new ones to take back to their CAC groups. So won't necessarily be coming to any kinds of decisions or anything today. This is just to help you work through some things because you've had a lot of questions and some of them are technical that staff doesn't have the ability to answer. So the state agency guests who are with us today, we're going to ask them to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their work and their agency, but we're not asking for presentations specifically from them. These guests are professionals in their fields, and they can answer technical questions, they can offer suggestions, and they can help CAC members refine their priorities and goals to take back to their committees. We're going to be using the chat feature quite a bit to kind of keep this managed. And Senior Planner Ian Sisson will be here doing some of that managing for us to get everybody organized. So we're going to take a moment, go around and introduce everyone, including anybody who calls in. And Ian is going to rename the callers so we can tell who is speaking so that we can have a better discussion. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass the torch, so to speak, to Ian Sisson.
Hey everyone, this is Ian Sisson, Senior Planner with the Clatsop County Planning Department. Thank you, Julia, for the introduction. I don't have anything to add, and I don't see any other phone callers at this point in time. But as they hop on and there's a break in the action, I will collect their names and change them here on the screen so we know who everyone is. I think we have at least one more county staff person here. We have one labeled Planning Counter PC and one labeled Clatsop County Community Development. I think one of those folks is Gail.
Yeah, Gail Hendrickson, Community Development Director.
Okay, how about Mike Sinnott?
Hi, I'm Mike. I'm the Assistant District Fish Biologist for the North Coast Watershed District out of Tillamook, and just here to answer questions or offer advice when it comes to fisheries or fish habitat, and looking forward to it.
Linda Eierman?
Linda Eierman. I am in Arch Cape. I'm a member of the Southwest Coastal Citizens Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Linda. Carol Johansson? Okay, I don't have anybody responding at that one. How about Joy Vaughn?
I can get my camera working here. Joy Vaughn, Department of Fish and Wildlife. I am the Land Use and Waterway Alterations Coordinator out of Salem, and I work in the Habitat Division. So I work statewide. I'll get this to be working. I work statewide on land use issues and coordinate closely with folks like Mike and Dave, who's also on the call, on a range of fish and wildlife issues and habitat. So thank you again for inviting us to participate today.
Thank you, Joy. Cheryl Johnson?
Cheryl Johnson. I live out in East County, and I am a member of the Northeast CAC, and I am the liaison from Northeast CAC to the countywide CAC.
Thank you, Cheryl. I see Carol Connell.
Hi, I'm Carol Connell, the city planner for the city of Gerhardt, and very interested in the greater county land around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Charles Dice.
Yeah, it's Charles Dice. I live in Cove Beach. I'm also on the Southwest Coastal Citizens Advisory Committee.
Jed Arnold.
My name is Jed Arnold. I'm the Environmental Stewardship Coordinator for Hampton Family Forests out in the Napa area.
Thank you, Jed. David Nuzum.
Yeah, Dave Newsom. I work ODFW Wildlife here in Tillamook.
Thank you, Dave. Nadia Gardner.
Nadia Gardner. I live down in Arch Cape and I'm a planning commissioner.
Thank you, Nadia. Commissioner Pamela Webb.
I am Commissioner Pamela Webb, and it's nice to be here, and thank you for all of your input at every level of government. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Nancy Ferber from Crest.
Hi, I'm Nancy Ferber. I'm a coastal planner with the Columbia River Estuary Study Task Force, and I work with jurisdictions all the way down to Tillamook up to City of Ilwaco.
Thanks, Nancy. Lisa Phipps.
Oh, sorry about that. Lisa Phipps, North Coast Regional Representative for the Department of Land Conservation and Development.
Thank you, Lisa. Andy Finn. Well, we can come back to Andy. Ashley Latora.
Good afternoon. I'm Ashley Latora. I'm a stewardship forester for the Oregon Department of Forestry, and I work with landowners and loggers and forest landowners in compliance with the Oregon Forest Practices Act.
Thank you, Ashley. Chris Farrar.
I'm Chris Farrar. I live in the Astoria area. I serve on the Clatsop County Planning Commission and also am on the board of directors of the Clatsop Soil Water Conservation District.
Angie from the Nicanicum Watershed Council.
Hi, everybody. I'm Angie Riesland. I'm the coordinator for the Nicanicum Watershed Council, and we cover all of the Nicanicum Watershed, which includes Seaside and Gerhardt.
Todd Lundy. Todd Lundy. Todd, are you able to hear us? Todd, I'm so sorry, your audio is not coming through.
I was interrupted. Yeah, my name's Todd Lundy, and I'm live in Astoria. Oh my. Let's see. How about that? No?
We've got you now. Yes, we can hear you now. Yes.
Yeah, I can't hear you. But anyway, Todd Lundy, Southwest Coastal Citizens Committee, and also the committee members.
Okay, I think he said that he is a liaison, and that's great. Thank you, Todd. Vaughn Balzer.
Vaughn Balzer with the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, Mineral Land Regulation and Reclamation Program. I've been with DOGAMI for about 15 years, and currently I'm the floodplain reclamationist and rules coordinator for the agency. And I'll be here to speak to DOGAMI requirements in terms of reclamation and resource protections, and hopefully we'll be able to inform and answer questions on behalf of this effort for the county. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Philip Johnson, Camp Rylea.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Philip Johnson. I work for the Oregon Military Department, the Adjutant General's Installation Division, and I'm assigned down here at Camp Rylea.
Very good. Thank you. I think I've got everybody. I had two people who did not respond. Hopefully it's not because you can't. Andy Finn and Carol Johansson. If you had comments that you wanted to put in and you're having problems connecting with us, please feel free to use the chat. So I'd like to get started, if I can remember how to do this, with sharing my screen. Let's see. Okay, this is where we started originally here, talking about the wildlife habitat and resources. If you have questions, go ahead and place them into your chat box, and Ian will take care of making sure that you have an opportunity to speak. But one of the things that we got started with was looking at some things that needed to be updated. And I guess probably one of the first things that happened was we had recommended, and this is on policy 3, so let me move down here. Oops, there we go. There. The county would rely on strict enforcement of the Oregon Forest Practices Act to protect riparian vegetation along Class 1 streams and lakes and Class 2 streams affecting Class 1 streams from potential adverse effects of forest practices. Staff had recommended bringing the riparian protection ordinances into alignment with the Oregon Forest Practices Act. And recognizing that the county does not have authority over it. And I wanted to check in with Mike Sinnott, and see if he had anything to offer or suggest or recommend for us.
I do, yeah. So there was a little bit of a miscommunication here. I noticed this when I was going through the comments here this week. So in these situations where the Forest Practice Act is already being used, there's really nothing for the county to do. I agree with referring to FPA and what it says. My recommendation was for policy 4, or I think it's policy 4. I guess we'll get to it, but for development in zones outside industrial forest. My recommendation was for the county to bring their riparian protection ordinances up to in line with the FPA. So basically, maybe a simplified version, but basically use those same buffer widths in places in the county outside industrial forest.
Okay, so I'd like to see if I've got anybody out there with any questions for Mr. Sinnott or who wants to have a discussion on this topic.
Julia, I have a question.
I hear Ashley.
Yes, this is Ashley Latora. I had a
Yes.
question. First, I just wanted to point out that the Forest Practices Act only applies when someone is doing a commercial forest operation. So if they're not doing a commercial forest operation, even if they are a forest landowner, they theoretically could cut trees along a fish-bearing stream as long as they don't barter, sell, or trade the wood or hire someone else to do the work for them. So the way this is written, it sounds like the county is relying on ODF to apply the FPA on, even what a private landowner would do. Or am I misreading that?
Well, I think that what we were talking about was using the FPA as a guideline for stream buffers for the rest.
4 in policy 4, but what about 3?
3.
The county shall rely on strict enforcement of the Oregon Forest Practices Act to protect riparian vegetation. Are you meaning, like I said, the FPA only applies to commercial forest operations?
So basically what you're telling me here is policy 3 needs to be completely reworked, because this is what is adopted from back in the 1970s.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that I wouldn't want someone to infer that the Forest Practices Act would apply to a non-commercial operation. Say somebody's got trees along a river, but they're blocking their view or something, they cut them all down. If they don't barter, sell, or trade that wood or hire someone to do that work, the FPA is not going to save those trees.
Okay.
So, and then also the other point is that Class 1 and Class 2 are outdated terminology under the Forest Practices Act.
So we have outdated language.
Yeah, Ashley, what's the new correct language?
We've divided our streams into type D, means a stream that has domestic use, but no fish use. Then type F for fish with or without domestic use. Type N for neither fish or domestic. And now we have type SSBT, which is salmon, steelhead, bull trout, which is a type of type F stream. It's a subtype.
And then Ashley, am I correct? Within those, then it's also based on large, medium, and small size streams.
Right.
Okay, so our chat box is starting to fill up a little bit here. Do we want to pursue this conversation, or do we want to turn to the chat for just a minute? It's still about streams.
Yeah, so I can help with a little bit of this. Ashley, have you got the setbacks in front of you, or I've got?
Yeah,
I think I've got the right ones.
Yeah, I probably do or know them, but anyhow, I'm not seeing the chat though, so I can't refer to that. So is there a specific question?
Yeah, so somebody just asked for what the setbacks were under the FPA.
Okay.
And I've got them. You can take it or I can, either way.
I'll take it. So, right. It depends on what a little bit. So a large type F has a 100-foot RMA. A large type D has a 70-foot, and a large type N has a 70-foot. A medium type F has 70-foot. A medium SSBT has 80 feet. Medium type D is 50, and a medium type N is 50. A small type F is 50. A small type SSBT is 60 feet, and a small type D is 20. Now, that's just the riparian management area, and then depending on the number and type of trees and the basal area stocking level you have in that RMA, you may be able to reduce that buffer down to as low as 20 feet. The first 20 feet is always no touch.
Okay. So Ashley, is that something that you can email to me so that I can send it out so that people can see it? That would be awesome. Thank you. And then Mike, I have on the screen an email between you and me that had something that you were suggesting. And so your recommendation to the county was, as a fish biologist, was bring the riparian protection ordinances into alignment with the Oregon Forest Practices Act, and consult with the Oregon Department of Forestry for details on the Forest Practices Act. But you suggested a simplified version of the riparian protection buffers, which we see below here. And so I'll get that from Ashley. So I want to throw this out to the committee members. Are these things that you would like to consider and have further discussion on in your committees? If that's the case, let me get that information out to you. We can get that probably into your January agendas if you would like. So let me just ask that question of you. You don't have to answer at this moment, but I would like to take a look at some questions. Let's see, we've got big game. Let's wait on that. Carol Connell asks, what are the setbacks from fish-bearing streams? Carol, have we answered that question yet?
Yes, my follow-up question is, can we make those, is there a method to increase those amounts, such as what was done in the Columbia River Gorge Management Plan this year, to a more protective standard, 200 feet?
Not if someone's doing a commercial forest operation. No, I do not believe that county can supersede state law. But I don't know the answer to your question for a non-commercial forest activity.
I would think for non-commercial, my understanding is that the county ordinances are really what determine what size that buffer is. So if it's non-commercial timber and it's county property, or within the county's ordinances, I think you can make those buffers whatever you want them to be.
Okay, is everyone clear on what that means? I'd like to check in. I know I have some commercial foresters in the group today. Jed, I saw your name. Did you want to make any comments here?
As Ashley mentioned, I don't think that what's under discussion at the moment would be able to supersede the regulations in the Forest Practices Act. As far as non-commercial, operations, I guess speaking from a company position, I don't have anything to comment on that. I would really suggest that perhaps the CACs to talk with some small woodland owners.
Okay.
A lot of those folks can do harvest activities that aren't sold. They mill and use the products on their own land, and this could potentially impact them in ways that aren't foreseen for people who don't manage property like that.
Thank you, Jed.
Yeah, so just to kind of clarify, like basically my recommendation was just to try to, because I think right now, Julia, you've got what's Clatsop County's current riparian protection ordinance? So it's basically like 30 feet and 50 feet depending on the flow of the stream. Is that right?
From our shoreland protection areas and our riparian protection areas are 50 feet. And then we have this language that says 35 feet from the line of non-aquatic vegetation, which is poorly defined. And that is something that we're going to be working on because it is confusing. So we've got those two different things running. And one of the goals at the staff level on this is that we get that defined and make it so that it's easy for everybody to understand, and it does the job that it needs to do.
Right. So the thought of ODFW was that if we could bring the other riparian protection ordinances in the county up to par with the Forest Protection Act, it would provide a greater level of protection to the riparian areas than we currently have. And I think everybody here probably already knows the taglines, but your riparian zones are kind of your most important zones for water temperature, controlling water temperature by shading the water, for eliminating erosion by stabilizing stream bank, for helping filter runoff from any land use going on outside. So especially in the times we're in, and with the changes we foresee in the future, if we can expand those riparian protection areas a little bit throughout the county, it would be a good thing for fish and for habitat and for water quality.
So I have a question. Under the Forest Practices Act, an operator and a landowner can work within that RMA. If the county was to adopt those standards, would they have that same latitude, or would it be a no-touch area?
I think that's something that would be part of what gets worked out through this process.
I just kind of wanted to bring that up.
No, it's a good point to bring up. That's what we want to refine and figure out what the overall goal is on this. And I wanted to say I see questions in the chat regarding tide pool habitats. We actually have David Fox who will be joining us at 2 o'clock. And David is the Resource Assessment and Management Sector Leader for the Marine Professional Program, or pardon me, Marine Resources Program with ODFW. So I'm going to hold the tide pool questions until 2 o'clock when he joins us. So let's see.
This is Ian Sisson. I had a couple of quick points. One person had requested in the chat that everyone state their name, identify yourself before you speak so you can keep track of who's talking. And then there was a question from Nadia Gardner about the riparian buffer topic. And I think we just kind of hit on this question, but there was, she wanted to know what a riparian buffer is and what can or can't happen within a riparian buffer. Could there still be structures? What kind of vegetation removal would be permitted, if any?
Well, can we start with maybe asking Ashley to tell us from the Forest Practices Act perspective what that would be?
Sure, this is Ashley Latora. Okay, so you have a riparian management area. Let's just take an easy one, a large fish-bearing stream. The riparian management area is measured slope distance starting at I always tell the landowner where the vegetation starts. So it's kind of where I'd have to look up the formal definition if it's I think it's the mean annual high water mark. And so we measure up slope distance. We have a 100-foot RMA. So the first 20 feet, 0 to 20, is a no harvest, no entry area, no disturbance there. And then depending on how many trees and the basal area, which is the cross-sectional area of a tree, if you meet the requirements of the Forest Practices Act, then theoretically you can clear cut from 21 feet to 100 feet. And I'm really kind of oversimplifying this down because there's a huge section in the Forest Practices Act. I'd be willing to go into greater detail with anybody interested on how many trees and how much basal area and how do you determine all of that. I spent like an hour this morning with a landowner doing that. So I don't want to take up too much time here today. What more? I'm not sure how much more to add at this point.
Okay, so I think what Nadia is probably then is asking staff, this is Julia again, to define what the riparian buffer means. And so in, like, for example, the 50-foot shoreland overlay, at that 50-foot level, nothing is supposed to occur. I'm not saying that things don't occur, but typically it's supposed to be an area that's just kept natural. We discourage mowing, but I'm not aware that the county enforces that particularly. It's always wonderful to see people do restoration, like the removal of Himalaya blackberry, for example. But the riparian buffer, we have this thing in the code that says that there are, to setbacks, there's an exception for things that are less than 30 inches in height. And so I'm thinking maybe that's what she's considering. This is the time when we probably go back to the committees and ask that question. What do we mean by that? Do we mean absolutely nothing? Is there, or do we still allow things that are 30 inches or less in height to intrude in certain types of setbacks? Typically that's side yard setbacks and things like that. We're not talking about riparian setbacks. But I think that's probably something for further discussion and within the committees, in the CACs. Ian, what other questions do you have in the chats?
So I think that covers the riparian buffer questions. Oh, there was a question from Chris Farrar. He was wondering if lakes are classified in a similar way to streams with the F, D, N, and SSB classifications, or is there a different system for lakes?
This is Ashley Latora. Yes, Chris, we do determine lakes. They're also according to size and whether or not they're fish bearing or not, and then what sort of buffer they receive around them, and wetlands as well. So we have size categories and what in riparian areas and what you can and can't do in those RMAs.
This is Ian Sisson again. This question may be for Lisa Phipps if she's available. And it's not on the chat here, but it has come up in the Southwest Advisory Committee, and that is whether there are concerns with imposing new riparian buffers that may make all or most of a small residentially zoned lot unbuildable, and what variance provisions may be required to be left in place.
Oh, that's a good question. It certainly could happen, and I have seen, and I'm going to look into this, so I'm just going to speak a little off the cuff here, but I have seen in other ordinances opportunities for exceptions, not like we think of goal exceptions, but exceptions to the setbacks. A little different process than a variance. The criteria are very specific. So we could look at that as some addition. The challenge with going through these riparian buffers is if you're going to veer away from safe harbor, which is written in the rules, then you're going to have to consider an inventory on your riparian resources. And what you have may very well suffice, but it's something that you're going to want to keep in mind as you move forward thinking about stream buffers. Did I answer your first question, Ian?
Yes, thanks, Lisa.
Okay, yeah. But I will look into that a little bit more just to make sure my off-the-cuff comment wasn't too sideways, but I've certainly seen that in other jurisdictions.
Hi, so this is Mike again. If I could speak to that too. I mean, obviously not in Clatsop, but in other counties that our district works with, in that scenario that you described where, you know, riparian protection takes up the majority of a lot, we will actually go out on site and do a site visit with the landowner at the county's request to look at what the actual biological impact would be. So, you know, if the lot was all old growth timber, you know, we would probably have a comment to the landowner and to the county that the biological impact is going to be fairly severe, and that we, you know, probably wouldn't recommend developing that lot if it's already been developed or the vegetation's already been removed to a point where it's just building and there's not much biological impact. Then ODFW would, you know, recommend maybe some sort of simple mitigation, or just, you know, recommend to the county that the variance be allowed. And we don't actually have the authority, Art, but we can make comments and recommendations to the county kind of as a servant to say, hey, here's what the actual biological impact is, despite, you know, regardless of what the distance is. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, that's very, very useful to know.
I agree. This is Julia. Thank you. Are there other questions or comments on this? If not, I'd like to quickly shift the same topic over to, we have a couple of folks from the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries to kind of maybe talk a little bit about stream buffering, erosion control, and that sort of thing, unless there are any other questions here to follow up on these.
Oh, Julia, Carol Connell, just maybe to sum it up, I would hope the committees would consider updating their science if it's actually based on 1970s standards. Things have really changed, and the destruction that can occur in some of these distances is significant to our fish-bearing streams, and our water quality. And I just hope that maybe you kind of dig deeper into that for setbacks.
And so, Carol, you're talking about that for non-Forest Practices Act, where the county actually has jurisdiction. Is that correct?
Yes, I don't think I can go into commercial. I imagine that's the legislature.
Correct.
But I think the county can take some leadership in their lands, and I appreciate the fact that at least you're trying to coincide with the ODF standards now, and that is a big step. But looking into the future, those standards are not as protective as they could be. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Was there anyone else? Okay, so Vaughn or Sarah, could you give us just a little bit of background about the kinds of setbacks that we were talking about, which are far greater, I believe, for mining and also and quarrying and the types of activities? I'm not extremely familiar, and so I'm thinking that probably the general public isn't either.
Thanks. And this is Vaughn Balzer with the Oregon Department of Geology. I'm not sure if Sarah was available today to be on the call or not. I didn't see her in the call, but so from DOGAMI's perspective, our role is really twofold. And when we look at permitting a mine site or amending a permit to a mine site, there are a number of things that we would consider. And first and foremost is generally the land use approval, and what sort of restrictions were included with the land use approval. Per statute and rule, DOGAMI cannot allow something at a mine site that was specifically prohibited via the local land use approval. And as such, if there are setbacks that come through the local land use process, we could not allow a setback of a narrower width or less protective width than the setbacks that were applied at the land use level. That said, we do have a role and a responsibility to protect natural resources, and to the extent that we see the need to increase a setback to protect natural resources such as fish in a fish-bearing stream, we have our own authority to do that. Generally, we don't have a set rule of specific setback distances. Ideally, in a perfect world, there would be some input from ODFW at the land use process, and then that input would be included in the land use approval. DOGAMI also would consult ODFW and other permitting and reviewing agencies as part of our process. And so, we would take any considerations provided to us in terms of comments from ODFW or other agencies in terms of our setback guidance. One of the things that we're trying to protect in terms of the mining process are impacts to adjacent properties. And so we would often look at the proposed mine plan to try and assess and determine if that mine plan adequately provides protection to those adjacent properties. Many mine sites can have significant, amounts of excavation. Mining, having a high wall, a benched high wall of 100 feet plus is not uncommon for mine sites, and typically we would not want a 100-foot vertical cut right up adjacent to a property, an external property boundary, because that would most likely result in those offsite impacts. I can pause here for a minute and provide for some questions, but yeah, our process is somewhat unique and site dependent and dependent upon the plans for the site, and those are all parts of the things that we would review in determining, appropriate setback distances. And those setback distances would be applied by activity. So we might have an excavation setback. We might have a setback that's required to remain undisturbed. We might have a setback for excavation, but that allows other activities such as stockpiling or processing. And I'll pause now to provide a moment for questions if anyone has any specific questions.
Okay, so I'd like to check and see, this is Julia. Do we have any questions for Vaughn?
Yes, this is Gail Henriksen. I have a question that's come up at our citizen advisory committees. We've just been talking about the Forest Practices Act. Does DOGAMI have a comparison act where you have your own set of regulations that the county would not be able to supersede?
Well, there is the Mine Land Reclamation Act, which is where our authority comes from. Our authority, however, the permits we issue are Class B permits, and the land use permits are Class A permits. And so I believe our statutes and rules build upon the land use process. And so we do not have siting authority. We do not get to say yes or no, a mine site can exist at this specific location on this property. That's really the role of the planning department via the land use statutes and rules. And then our permit kind of piggybacks on those. And again, we cannot authorize something that is not already authorized within that land use approval. And I could provide more if there's some clarification there needed.
Julia, Carol Connell, it's a quick question. Similar to both ODF and DOGAMI, when you make these site evaluations that sound like they might be somewhat discretionary, depending on the site, do you have clear and objective standards or guidelines or criteria in order to come to your conclusions about locations of structures or removal of trees? Do you have good sound criteria?
Okay, and Carol, to whom this is Julia. To whom was that directed? Are you asking about the setback by activity that Vaughn was just asking about or talking?
Well, actually, yes, both Vaughn and I think it might. I was also referring to ODF.
Okay.
In the same for the same reason.
Okay, Vaughn,
Yeah.
did you want to go first? Thank you.
Yes, and that is a great question. And yeah, our statutes and rules do not really provide any sort of guidance on setbacks specifically. Our statutes and rules, give us the authority to protect natural resources. And so that's, we utilize that authority. We review the land use approval and the mine plans, and then we make, kind of our discretionary, if you will, assessment of the situation. We put that into a draft report that then gets circulated to the reviewing and other permitting agencies, and then, we address comments that come back on that report. But yeah, in terms of actual kind of guidance, if you will, there really isn't any in terms of setbacks in statutes and rules, at least related to the Mine Land Reclamation Act.
Ashley, did you want to follow up?
Yes, this is Ashley Latora. I have a question, a clarifying question back. Is your concern about if someone builds a house on forest lands, whether or not we have setback rules, or are you talking about commercial forest operations along fish-bearing streams?
Are you speaking to me, Ashley?
Yes.
Well, I'm interested in both because they do both impact the streams. And maybe we're finished with the Forest Practices Act, but I would ask you the same. Do you have clear and objective standards by which you make your reviews? And same with DOGAMI.
In the Forest Practices Act for commercial forest harvesting operations, yes, we have some hard and fast, I'd say, benchmarks somebody has to meet. Number of trees along a fish-bearing stream for a large a certain amount of basal area. The first 20 feet cannot be operated in. No equipment used within so many feet of a fish stream. That sort of thing. Yes, we have clear-cut criteria for that. I do not approve or disapprove plans, landowners and or operators notify the Oregon Department of Forestry when they intend to do a commercial forest operation. And if they're going to operate within a certain distance of protected resources, whether it's fish and wildlife resources or like high landslide hazard, they may have to provide an additional documentation called a written plan, and that comes in and that is reviewed and by stewardship foresters such as myself. And I'd be happy to meet with you outside of this meeting if you'd like more information on this. I don't want to go too deep or take up too much time.
Thank you very much.
Oh, and part two on housing, we don't have any setbacks. We have some recommendations for fire protection, but we do not have any rules or setbacks for how close your forest can be to your house. Just some recommendations.
And I should probably, this is Julia, pop in there for a second and say that we do at the county level have multiple requests per year for forest dwellings of various types, template test dwellings, and I've got a large tract dwelling request on my desk right now. And so there are standards for having fuel-free areas around dwellings that are set. So basically setbacks of 30 feet from forest land areas. So I don't know, Carol, if that speaks to any of your concerns, but there is a 30-foot setback to a forest land from a dwelling, and that means that it can be cleared up to 30 feet for the home site.
This is Ashley again. I'd just like to throw in there that as a forester, I'd really recommend increasing that, and also more for wind than fire here, but we certainly have seen fire right up to the coast this past fall. So when the committees get to that section, please look at that carefully.
Ashley, would you have a recommended distance?
For fire or wind or both?
Yes.
Well, for wind, I would certainly want to be at least a tree and a half distance, you know, the height of the tree away. I don't want a tree hitting my house. So I would think that if a tree is averaging 100 feet tall, that you'd want a clear distance of 150. I'm just throwing this out here more as a citizen, as a forester citizen, not as in my job. For fire, we do have some recommendations. I can't really speak off the top of my head right now. I would think 30 would be a little bit close. As the people in Bay Ocean found out, they had trees closer than that to their homes. So, I mean, I think you want to think of something similar for both wind and fire. It all depends on the intensity of the fires and how fast it's going to run. But there are certain things that you can do to help your buildings be less impacted by wildfire.
Thank you, Ashley. This is Julia. So I just want to let you know that you have guaranteed yourself a seat at the Goal 7 hazards table. We will be asking you to join us again when we start talking about natural hazards.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question for Vaughn, and this is Gail Henriksen again. I don't know if you had a chance to go through our mineral and aggregate policies in our plan, but if you have had a chance, do you have any recommendations for us?
I have not had a chance to go through those. I did skim them briefly, but I have not gone through them in any sort of detail. Let's see, and there is a question in the chat room that I noticed from Connie Moore, and that's who controls the setbacks for mining. And really, you know, the setbacks that DOGAMI initially looks at are the ones that the land use would apply, because we cannot allow narrower or less restrictive setbacks than what a county land use approval would include. So that's our starting point. And then we would review the site location, the proposed plans, including the depth of mining, location of excavation areas. We would look at, you know, the slopes between the site and the streams, whether or not the streams are fish bearing. There's a whole bunch of things we would look into in terms of trying to figure out an appropriate setback. And again, our guidance is really twofold. We're supposed to ensure that natural resources are protected, and we're also supposed to ensure that neighboring properties are not impacted by the mine operation. And so, you know, we often will have setbacks specific to excavations. We will often have setbacks specific to processing and stockpiling, and we often have setbacks that are required to remain undisturbed. And those undisturbed setbacks are specifically intended to improve water quality and reduce the potential for impacts to natural resources in an adjacent stream or waterway, whether they're fish or the water itself. Let's see, trying to think of other things.
So can I interject here and say and ask then, does that mean that at the county level we have some input to the setback guidelines?
Absolutely, and ideally, okay. You know, one of the things that in a perfect world, you know, the county might consider would be, you know, what are the activities on the adjacent properties. You know, I'm not a land use expert, but my understanding is that it's the land use process that's supposed to balance, you know, land use activities that may be in conflict with each other to some extent or another if they're occurring on adjacent properties. And so, you know, DOGAMI does not have the ability or authority to say a mine site can or can't happen in a specific site. And so ideally, considerations in regards to what the adjacent land is being used for would happen as part of the land use process, you know, prior to that land use approval making it to our agency.
I've been exposed to 2 floods, and so I'm always thinking about setbacks. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have more questions for DOGAMI? Do we have more questions for Ashley or for Mike Sinnott? Do we have anything regarding setbacks to streams at this point? Or should we be thinking about moving to another section?
So this is Charles Dice. I have a question.
Absolutely.
So one of the things Ashley said kind of startled me, I suppose, is in the sense that if a company, you know, owns, you know, big timber, let's call it, owns a bunch of land that has streams on it. Perhaps those streams are in somebody's watershed and provide water for a community downstream somewhere. But it sounded like as long as the big timber is not doing a commercial activity, they could, in fact, actually cut down the streams within the riparian setback area and just claim they were doing something different and not a commercial activity. So I don't know if I'm jumping to conclusions or if that's an accurate statement. So I'd like to clarify that.
This is Ashley Latorre again. Thank you, Charles. My 30 years of experience, I have not had a timber company do that. All their land is forest land. Whatever they're pretty much doing out there is for the marketing and growing of timber. So they would be required to be under the Forest Practices Act. I would have to really sit and think hard of a time when they wouldn't be. My comparison was to a timber company landowner, just Joe Smith, who owns timber out there, you know, forest land. If he's not barter selling, trading the wood, and he's doing the work himself, he could cut down trees right along a fish stream and say, I want firewood, make firewood there. I want to make it a park-like setting there. Where in the Forest Act wouldn't apply there. So that was, does that clarify it for you?
Yeah, okay, so, but the county's riparian setback would apply and presumably, would prevent him from getting within whatever the setback is
Right,
in the
that's what
county
we
rules.
hope, that the county then, that they would fall under the county.
Right.
And it would be up to the county to do the enforcement of that too. And I think sometimes there hasn't always been that workforce available.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you, Ashley. We have been joined by David Fox from Marine Sources Program with ODFW, and I know that we had a question from at least one person in the Southwest Coastal area regarding regulations that have to do with tide pool habitat and the extent, to what extent regulations are posted near the areas, and are there gaps in signage or regulations that the county could address. And I've also put on the screen shoreland policies and that relate to fish and wildlife habitat. So I wanted to go ahead and let Mr. Fox introduce himself, and then let folks ask him some things to help them work through these goals and policies. Mr. Fox?
There might not work. Yeah, so I'm Dave Fox with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Marine Resources Program, which is my office is in Newport, Oregon. And part of the work we do is managing natural resources in the marine environment, which includes tide pool areas or rocky intertidal areas. And we have a number of regulations governing those that are dependent on the area, the specific location you're at. So I guess with that, I just open to just questions about either our regulations or what's going on with management of those areas, or anything related to that.
Ian, would you be able to ask the questions from the Southwest Coastal Group?
Sure, this is Ian Sisson with the Clatsop County Planning Department. So we had a meeting last week, and a couple questions came up with the Southwest Coastal Group about tidal areas and how they're regulated. And this would include the intertidal rocky areas as well. And so the questions were generally what regulations exist and to what extent are those regulations posted near those areas, and whether there were any gaps in signage or in regulation that the county could address. And I just wanted to mention also that Lisa Phipps at least partially answered the question and said, these are resources that would fall under Goal 9, and that ODFW and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service may enforce regulations within those areas. And Lisa was going to send some information on this topic and how local communities can engage in Goal 19, which is not a locally administered goal, unlike the rest of the 18 planning goals. So, Mr. Fox, if you wanted to add anything you feel is relevant on that topic, I'm sure it would be appreciated.
Yeah, okay. So, if we just narrow it to, say, the rocky intertidal areas along the coast, there's really at least 3 state agencies that have, some level of jurisdiction for regulating those areas. ODF&W, state parks, and Department of State Lands. And so the ODF&W jurisdiction is for basically controlling the harvest of animals on those sites. So we have regulations that limit the number of invertebrates or shellfish you could take by species. There's fishing regulations on those sites, like licenses are required. There's also separate regulations for any level of commercial harvest that may occur on those areas. We have kind of a set of baseline regulations that cover most of the coast, and then we have specific areas that we call, special management designations that have generally more stringent regulations. Usually they're closures to harvest of certain animals. And a good example in Clatsop County is Haystack Rock in Cannon Beach. So that's a marine garden which doesn't allow harvest of any invertebrates, basically. We also have our marine reserves and marine protected areas, which, although they're primarily kind of offshore areas, most of them extend to the shoreline and include the rocky shoreline in the regulations. And many of those have closures of harvest. And there's really only one in Clatsop County. It's really part of one. The Cape Falcon Marine Reserve is partially in Clatsop County and partially in Tillamook County. So that's kind of the baseline regulations from ODFW. State Parks manages marine seaweed harvest. So they have limits on how much seaweed could be harvested in areas, and generally their areas closed to seaweed harvest kind of parallel our areas. So for example, at Haystack Rock, we're closed to take of invertebrates, and State Parks is closed to take of marine seaweed in that area. So that's kind of in a nutshell, the existing regulations. And I'm guessing maybe some of the questions might have been generated because of the current process that the Ocean Policy Advisory Council is going through right now to revise what's called the Rocky Habitat Management Strategy. So that's part of the Territorial Sea Plan. And under that process, citizen groups or really anyone can submit proposals for kind of proposing new special management areas that could have special regulations on them. For example, harvest closures, although some of them may not. And that process has been ongoing for about 2 years now, but it's actually kind of coming to an end. The public proposals are due December 31. Those will be reviewed in the following months after that. And then either around May or June, the Ocean Policy Advisory Council will meet to make decisions on which areas might get designated as kind of those new protected sites. So that, there's a lot of details to that, but that's kind of in a nutshell what's going on right now. As far as the question on signs, so we have, many are probably familiar with these like big yellow signs posted in kind of access points along the coast or even along bays that give the shellfish harvest regulations. So we try to have those at as many access points as we can where there might be, harvest that's occurring at the site that access leads to. We probably have about 120 of those signs along the coast, but they do periodically disappear. They erode or they fall off or get buried or whatever. So some of those could be missing. And then at these special protected sites, we try to have signs at the access points leading to those that say, what the site is and what types of limitations to harvest there might be. So Haystack Rock, there should be some signs at some of the access points there. Cape Falcon area, there should be signs related to the Marine Reserve there. But like the other signs, the signs don't necessarily last forever. So there's occasionally they go missing and need to be replaced. They're often associated with the state parks. We'll have like a cluster of signs. We often have the signs associated with that sign cluster. But we have had reports, not necessarily from Clatsop County, but from other areas of signs that have gone missing over the years, and we make efforts to replace those. Let's see, what was the rest of the question? Like how the county or like local groups could get involved? Was that part of the question?
Yeah, this is Ian Sisson again. And so there was a couple of questions that came in as you were speaking. But so the end of the question that I had originally posed was whether there were gaps that the county could help fill. And then there were a couple questions that came in, if you can see in the chat. Connie Moore asked whether there was an agency monitoring the health of the tidal animals and determining whether those health issues are locally created or if they could be related to pollution and climate change in general. Another question was noting that there are rocky shores all along the coast and wondering whether the harvest limits you mentioned apply to all areas or if the regulations vary from area to area. There was a question of whether limiting harvesting, how can we work on limiting harvesting more or eliminating it completely? And again, on signage, asking how to get more signs for some of the smaller or lesser known public access points to the beach.
Okay, I tried to jot those down. I'll try to kind of take them one by one. So kind of that end part of your original question about county involvement. It kind of really depends on what the capacity is, whether it's, county staff or if it's like volunteer groups with the county. But a lot of you are probably familiar with the Haystack Rock Awareness Program. So that, started out as purely a volunteer group to provide kind of education and information to people visiting that site. One, to, have them learn about the marine environment, but also to learn about, good stewardship and protecting animals and that sort of thing. And that group, over the years has actually been become part of city government as well with Cannon Beach, where they have, I think, paid staff and, as well as a number of volunteers. So it's possible for any group to, start that sort of thing at any site. And, we find those to be really useful because it's a good way to get information to the public. They put forth kind of a stewardship message. They get people interested in the marine environment. So, if that sort of thing, if some group wanted to get together and do that, say at a different site, for example, Ecola or something like that, or, I don't know, Chapman Point, I don't know, somewhere else in the county, that would be useful. That would be helpful. As far as, say, getting involved and helping out with say, signs, for example, and this kind of goes part of that other question about getting more signs. One, if you see a place where there used to be a sign and it's gone, let us know because we often won't see it. We got to depend on people telling us that. So that's one area. As far as more signs, kind of let us know, what you see as maybe sites that might require more signs. It's something we can't necessarily respond to instantly because a lot of times we have to have the signs made and everything, and it takes time, to put all that together and then come up with a way to post them, whether it be on depending on who owns the land, the access point, all that kind of stuff. So sometimes it might take a while to respond to that type of thing, but we're definitely interested in hearing about that. So those are some examples of involvement. Question about monitoring. So we have a number of monitoring programs that are going on along the coast, and also universities, have monitoring programs as well. So there's I couldn't tell you the number off the top of my head, but there's probably about 6 maybe or so rocky intertidal sites along the coast that are fairly regularly monitored. Most of the monitoring involves doing counts of different species and looking at change in those over the years. Are certain species increasing or certain ones decreasing? Do we see those types of changes? So there's some regular monitoring at a number of sites that goes on for that. and those are kind of spread along the coast. So they give an indication of what might be going on in general. Nobody goes to every single site, and nobody has the resources to do that level of monitoring. And then there's been a lot of special projects, like when Sea Star wasting started. There was kind of a concerted, and still is kind of a concerted monitoring effort to track what's going on there. Initially, to see what the effects of the wasting disease were, and now more recently to see what the recovery is from that. So that's some examples of some other monitoring that are going on. And then we have our marine reserves program, which does a number of different type of monitoring studies at our 5 marine reserve sites along the coast. I'll kind of pause there to see if there's any more questions on monitoring.
Thanks, Dave. This is Ian Sisson. So I shared a link in the chat, which I hope is the right place to send people. It's the OregonOcean.info, and it looks like kind of the central area to find information about the Territorial Sea Plan and the ongoing process to update it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly the right spot. So there's kind of different tabs you could select on that website. One of them is for the OPAC, the Ocean Policy Advisory Council, and I think the first one it lands on usually when you open that site is kind of the Rocky Shores or the Rocky Habitat process. And there are some groups, or at least one group, working in Clatsop County to propose some sites for possible inclusion in that Rocky Habitat strategy. And since the proposals haven't been turned in yet, we don't really know exactly what sites or what those are going to look like. But I do know there's some folks working on it, and I don't know if someone in the group here might know of that as well. So that gets at one of the questions, if there's a desire to limit harvest more, or have some kind of influence on limiting harvest. That Rocky Shores process that's going on right now is kind of a prime example of where someone can kind of tag along with that and get involved. Like I said, we're nearing the end of it. The proposals are due December 31st, so it's a couple of weeks from now. But the way that process is set up is there's going to be what we're calling now the initial proposal process, where a number of proposals will come in and we'll go through that process of reviewing them, and possibly some of them will get enacted. But then after that, starting later next year, the Ocean Policy Advisory Council will start what they call the maintenance process, where people could propose sites basically at any time. There's a form and some really detailed instructions as to how to do that. If someone wants to do that later on, say starting fall of next year and beyond, that process will still be open. It'll be open indefinitely, basically. So it'll be possible to propose additional sites, propose management measures, for protecting those sites, and then try to get it through the approval process.
So this is Connie Moore again.
Yeah.
Just a quick. So it sounds like there is some monitor going on, and I appreciate you answering my question. I think my biggest concern is that it's complex. You can get pollution that's very local. You can get pollution that's coming over from other parts of the ocean, and then of course there's climate change. And I had heard about the Sea Star issues, and I was just wondering if the monitoring was continuing to try to amp up and figure out, as an ongoing process, continue to expand ways of knowing what may be creating health issues. And I appreciate the fact that they're counting things and all that, but does it seem like, from your perspective, that there is as part of it an ongoing effort to try to nail down, maybe specifically what's causing certain health issues?
Yeah. And it's one of those things, you can only do so much monitoring. There's only so much money out there to do it. But some things that have, one thing that's been going on for many years is at 3 or 4 sites along the coast. It's mostly along the central coast. Oregon State University has a very long-term program of doing a lot of specific studies at sites to try to determine, what types of factors influence, the success of different organisms, what influences changes in the populations. They do a lot of research looking at the physical oceanography, looking at food, phytoplankton, things like that the organisms feed on, and studying kind of the life history and kind of recruitment success of different animals. And that program has been going for close to 30 years now. So that's a really long-term ongoing program. Some things that have happened more recently, with the kind of more recent knowledge about ocean acidification, for example, we've started to put monitoring devices at a number of sites on the coast to look at pH levels, basically, to look at ocean acidification, how it might be affecting intertidal areas, because we have some pretty good data from offshore, either collected by ships or collected by oceanographic instruments that are moored in deeper water. But we didn't really until recently have any data right along the shoreline. What's happening right on the shoreline. So we've started putting those instruments in. I think we have 5 locations now with those instruments. So we're starting to collect that data, to see those effects. Okay. And there's starting to be studies going on with some specific animals as well. For example, what's the effects of acidification on mussels? A lot of animals with shells are affected by acidification. So there's some specific studies going on for that. So there's lots of things going on, but what we don't have is coverage at every single site. There's probably 200 separate sites along the coast, and it's possible there could be some localized things going on that we just don't know about, and may never know. Unless,
right.
Oh,
where's the money come in for funding these things?
So things that we're doing are associated with our Marine Reserves program. And when I say we, I mean ODFW. And that comes from state general fund. So that's just, general taxpayer dollars. Oregon State University is doing a lot of different projects, a lot of different things. They get a lot of their money from federal grants. They also get private foundation dollars as well. We've had some federal grants to do some things as well. So it's really a whole mix of money from different sources. A lot of it's grant money, yeah. Okay. I could go on forever. I'll stop.
David, thank you very, very much.
Sure.
I want to check and see if Charles Dice or Linda Eierman or perhaps Nadia Gardner is still with us. I want to check and see if their questions got answered, because they very specifically at the last Southwest Coastal Citizens Advisory Committee meeting did request information on this part of the project. The other thing I wanted to draw attention to is the shorelands policies that we actually have up regarding fish and wildlife habitat and areas. I placed that on the screen. So I'm looking maybe for some ideas about things that the county should include that aren't there now, and also to make sure that Charles and Linda and Nadia and anybody else got their questions answered.
Yeah, so this is Charles Dice. I think part of the question got answered in the sense that there is a mechanism in place that we could add sites to the Rocky Shores, and I know the North Coast Watershed Council is in fact doing that for a couple of sites. And it was good to hear about the signs, so I'll go check our access points here in Cove Beach, which is adjacent to the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve, and make sure our signs are still there. And if they're not, maybe request some. And then the last point was, okay, fine. Once we get the place protected, we've got signs in place. Who do we call for enforcement?
Oh, okay, yeah. Sorry, I missed that part of the question. Yeah. So our fish and wildlife regulations are enforced by Oregon State Police. So Oregon State Police has a special fish and wildlife unit, that has officers dedicated to fish and wildlife enforcement. So if you're out in out in the county somewhere and you see what you think is some sort of violation, you could basically call state police, and they provide our enforcement.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So just drawing your attention then to the screen where we've got just some goals and policies. They have to do with a lot of it with Ecola Creek. And oops, let me just move down just a little bit here. Okay, cost of mitigation. So I guess I would ask my committee members to be considering whether or not there are additional policies that we should be looking at, or refining the ones that exist. If there's any language in there that is archaic, Dave, I hope you'll let us know if there's anything in there that needs to be changed. The other thing is that, it might be that we want to take a look now at something a little bit farther upstream and maybe look at some habitat areas, and maybe talk for a moment or two about, maybe elk or bald eagles and those sorts of things, unless you have other questions for Mr. Fox.
Julia, I think Carol Connell had a question. This is Gail Hendrickson, and Carol had asked, do you regulate the Nicanicum estuary?
Yeah, I mean, we have, regulations for, again, it's mostly related to harvest of animals. So, I'm trying to think in the Nicanicum, from the marine standpoint, the only thing I could think of is Dungeness crab. I know people crab there. Those regulations would be the same as they are anywhere else. You have to have a shellfish license. It's a certain limit you could take. You can only take males. Those types of regulations. And then we would have, a whole suite of fishery regulations for the fish that occur in the estuary. And I'm not super familiar with what, particular species occur there. But they're basically all regulated. I mean, they all have some sort of harvest limit.
Hi, so this is Mike Zinnett again, and I jump in on that and speak to that a little bit. So as far as once you get inland, still in the estuary, but inland from the marine environment, all the fisheries are regulated. All harvest of fish there are regulated. Coho, Chinook, sea run, cutthroat. And those are regulations that we set based on population estimates and abundance estimates, and that are enforced by Oregon State Police. And then just estuaries in general are, so you've got Department of State Lands would regulate removal fill, Army Corps of Engineers would regulate levees or dikes or anything like that. Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife has regulations that affect fish passage or tide gates as they're replaced or reach trigger events. So it's kind of that question doesn't have a simple answer. Yes, they are regulated, but they're regulated by many different agencies in many different ways.
Gail, this is Julia. Do we think we have Carol's question answered? Carol?
I think that's a better question for Carol.
Okay.
Carol here. Thank you. I don't think there's any signage that leads down to the Nekanicum estuary from Gearhart, at least. And so I guess I can look on your website to check that out, the website you gave us. And yeah, there's crabbing and that's about it. Maybe some fishing, but not much.
Okay, thank you. Are we ready to look at a couple of other things here then? I was looking at policy 30.17, John Day Point to Eddy Point, which has identified bald eagle roosting trees shall be preserved. And so apparently we had at least a bald eagle roosting tree at some time. I won't go through and pick out all of the various policies in here that refer to wildlife, avian wildlife, and mammals, but I wondered if anybody had any questions regarding what we should be identifying as animals to be protected, or where we might get information about that. I just thought I'd check and see, does anybody else have questions regarding that? And remember, you can use your chat screen, your chat box. Do we have any goals or policies that we would like to talk about here, any potential ones? Thank you.
Yeah, this Charles Dice again. So I'm looking at, from our last Goal 5 meeting with the Southwest Coastal Citizens Advisory Committee, Table 1, Wildlife Habitat Resources, existing policies for Clatsop County goals and policies. There was a policy 10 that said the county will establish a procedure for protecting sensitive nesting sites from incompatible uses and activities. And I know in the committee we had taken a note to either question or find out about notification to citizens in affected areas about where these nesting sites are. And I quite frankly can't remember if we answered that question in the committee, but I don't think we did. So
this is Ian Sisson. Charles, I think you're right that we didn't answer that question, and we earmarked it to ask Fish and Wildlife staff. So what we had discussed in the committee is when we get an application that is in the vicinity of a known habitat resource site or habitat area, we're required by our code to send a notification to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife for review and comment. And so they will respond with some guidelines if there are any for that particular use. And so one of the questions that came up, I think, during our committee meeting was, is it possible to incorporate some of the map data that ODFW uses when we send them a proposal to look at? Is there publicly available data that could be incorporated onto the Clatsop County web maps so it's easier for applicants and for the general public to find that information in advance? So I don't know if that's a question Dave Newsom could answer, but I know I've worked with Dave before when we have conditional use applications that are in identified big game habitat areas.
Right. This is Dave here. Yeah, going back when I was reading through the previous goal, the language in the 80s, there were still, eagle nests could be counted on, one or two hands. And, they were delisted in 2009. And at this point, the nest sites and territories are so numerous, and they come and go with such regularity. There's new nests being built all the time, that it's tough to keep any kind of database up to date regarding those locations. So yeah, it's almost a case-by-case basis where I get a notification and have to go out and kind of look around or rely on local knowledge, people telling me there's a new nest in this section. I have a lot of pins on the map, but they're in no way accurate.
Is there any other, this is Ian Sisson again, is there any other mapping data, like data layers that you have provided to local jurisdictions to incorporate in their own public facing, web maps?
Beyond the big game major range and peripheral range that you have that we updated a few years ago, no mapping. We have some sensitive resource sites listed since we were just on the Nicanicum estuary. There's probably what most folks would be interested in as far as development along the shoreline there. There's a bandtail pigeon mineral site located there, things of that nature. There are a few pinpoint habitat things that we have here and there, but overall the only mapping that we really provide for you guys is that big game range.
So one thing that we were looking at is the big game range. And I'm going to switch screens here real fast and show you Clatsop County, everybody. Let me back out a little bit so that we get the whole thing here. And let's see, I don't look for this very often, so I'm looking for the big game habitat layer. Ian, where is it? Remind me.
Julia, it's only on our planning app currently. If you go to the planning web maps app.
There we are. I do this every single time.
And it's under overlays, which is selected already, but you have to click the drop down and then turn on big game.
There it is. And it's not in alphabetical order, so that slows me down a little bit. There we go. Okay, thank you, Ian. So this darker color here is the large game habitat area for Clatsop County. These lighter colors in here, that's peripheral big game habitat. So this is what we're using currently. If there is something better or newer, we probably should have a policy suggested by the committees to get this updated. But I don't even know, is there something that's newer? Dave, can you answer that?
No, we just, that looks like the one we just provided in 2017 or 2018, perhaps.
It's old.
It's newer than the one that was provided in 1978.
Okay. Okay. So based on that, I guess what I'm going to let my committees know then is that based on this is how staff makes a determination about whom to notify for various different types of applications. So the large game habitat and the peripheral game habitat, we would be including Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife staff in any of those applications for conditional uses. So just basically want to let people know that. Are there any other sections of this sets of goals and policies that any of my committee members would like to discuss? I'm going to throw that out to you.
I see Ashley Lertora has raised her hand here if you wanted to chime in, and then Charles, I think I heard you. We'll let you go next.
Thank you. This is Ashley Lertora. I just wanted to bring up for discussion under policy 30.19, Brownsmead, Nat Creek Policy 1. The second sentence reads, this area is well protected from winds and river currents, has relatively deep water, is one of the most important log storage areas in the estuary. I couldn't tell you the last time that I know that it was used for log storage. So I'm kind of thinking that's old language that maybe that local committee wants to take a look at. Just throwing it out for comment.
This is Julia. Ashley, could you tell me that policy number again?
Sure. That was policy 30.19 under policy 1.
Under policy 1, okay.
Look for log storage areas in the estuary.
Okay, thank you.
And Charles, I think you were starting to ask a question on wildlife habitat.
That's correct. I mean, looking at this map overlay, it looks like the entire county is pretty much covered. At least if I'm interpreting the map correctly, and that brownish colored area is the area where you would, you know, be notifying everybody if they fell within that area. So that wasn't my question. It's just kind of more like an observation. But the question really had to do with at the last week's meeting of the committee, we had a lot of conversation about big game corridors and whether or not there were any defined big game corridors and what the heck a big game corridor was and how we would go about protecting big game corridors, because certainly in topographically and geographically constrained areas like in the southwest corner of the county here in Arch Cape and Cove Beach, there are, you know, pretty narrowly defined, physically defined corridors where the elk and the deer can get, you know, up and down the coastline without, you know, strolling down Highway 101. So we'd certainly like to see those preserved, but the question came up was, okay, how do you define it, and how do you map them or list them?
Yeah, this is Dave. In terms of corridors, what we're really talking about there would be migratory. Our big game here isn't really migratory in the same sense that it is on the east side, where you have large populations going from one unit to another across Highway 47 or coming out of the Cascades down into the Applegate Valley, down near Medford, things like that, where you have a winter range and a summer range, and there's migration between the two. Our elk here very much stay in the same, you know, few miles of habitat generally. They may move down into the river valleys and up onto the higher elevations, but that's about it. They don't traverse long distances. We do have many crossing points, however, where say from Tillamook Head, they cross 101 there and head over towards Volmer Creek. You know, there's another spot near Camp Rylea where they cross frequently. There are a number of those areas. That's you know, where you tend to see the signs from ODOT. Some of those are into not even peripheral areas. If you'll notice on that map that's displayed, the entire area west of 101 is neither big game range, major or peripheral, and yet they do cross the highway there, and as anyone that lives in Gearhart knows, spend quite a bit of time there.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. This is Julia again. Dave, do you have any recommendations for any policies that the committees might devise that would be useful for anything having to do with the elk and their corridors? Well, as you said, we don't really have any, but the crossings, I guess, we have a few of those.
And Julia, to piggyback on that question, if I could, Carol Connell asked whether we would be developing specific policies coming out of the Oregon Solutions project.
There may be some coming out of the Oregon Solutions project. I have not been involved in that as deeply as Paul Atwood has. He would really be the one there, and I know they're working on kind of their final recommendations, should be out here quite shortly. In terms of these crossing spots, well, that's really, you know, less of an issue of habitat than it is of, you know, transportation involving ODOT and others in these areas where in the past we've sometimes had, you know, multiple elk hit in one fell swoop. Yeah, it's not so much development as it is, you know, a traffic management thing. I will say, in terms of development east of 101, we are looking at the kind of the Ensign Road area, which continues to be heavily developed, and I see more things keep coming down the line in that area. So that's one, and that falls in that kind of that peripheral big game range where we've already seen some displacement from the development there and expect some of that to continue.
And this is Gail
So
Hendrickson.
Policy-wise, I don't have much to add.
Okay, I just wanted to address the Oregon Solutions question, and this is Gail Hendrickson. And I was involved in, or have been involved in the process, and one of the subcommittees that's been created is looking specifically at land use issues and how development in that area has exacerbated interactions between humans and elk. And so coming out of that declaration of cooperation will be a series of recommendations and tools associated with land use that will look to examine our subdivision regulations, how we require and provide open space within subdivisions and partitions, and other strategies along those lines. So we as staff are making a recommendation that a policy be added to the comprehensive plan, that those recommendations be implemented, and the county moves forward with them. We are agreeing to move forward with examining them just by signing the Declaration of Cooperation, but to really just codify it again and give it a little extra backup and foundation. So that's where we are in the process. And we'll be making a presentation to the board at a work session on January 5th about those regulations and or recommendations coming out of that process with Oregon Solutions.
Okay, we've got a few more questions in the chat box over here, and a few more statements. Ian, could you check and tell me if there's anything that we've missed? Could you add it in?
Sure. Just recently from Connie Moore, we had a question about how someone could safely travel at a slower speed in those areas without creating a hazard with other cars, or if there was another way to create a different path for the elk that wouldn't involve them presumably crossing the road. So I'm not sure if that is something the Oregon Solutions project is making recommendations on, but maybe someone could speak to that.
Okay, so at this point, again, this is Gail Hendrickson. My understanding is that there's not going to be a recommendation to reduce the speed limit on 101 at this time. The committee that was involved in that, the Human Behavior Committee and also the Elk Behavior Committee, looked at several different options, including additional flashing lights at the highway and coloring some of the elk so that they would trip those lights. We've looked at underpasses and overpasses, but at this point, the committee's agreed that working with the local jurisdictions, the cities, the counties, and then we have ODFW and ODF involved, and we have several private property owners involved as well, that working with ODOT at this point was probably a very low recommendation, and so I don't believe that made the final cut of recommendations that you'll see in that declaration that's coming out.
Yeah, I think just adding to it, if the way I avoid elk and deer on Highway 202 and 103 is when I know that there's, it's a certain time of year or a time of night, I travel about 35 miles an hour and it works perfect. Can't imagine doing that on 101, but it would have been nice to save the elk and save my car.
Thanks, Connie. This is Ian Sisson again. Linda Eierman wanted to clarify that the Oregon Forest Practices Act regulates commercial activities, but that the county regulates land uses on the same lands. And so she wanted to know if that was correct. Linda, that is correct. And any land uses that are regulated by the Oregon Forest Practices Act, we defer to ODF to regulate. But as far as other land uses that don't fall under the Forest Practices Act, those would be open for the county to regulate unless there's some other kind of situation we're not allowed to supersede, but none come to mind.
Thank you, Ian. This is Julia. That is absolutely correct. So I'm back to asking committee members, do you have any language in any of these goals or policies that you want to work on, that you want to have maybe some technical advice on? This is your moment.
Julia, can you hear me?
Yes, it sounds like Todd Lundy.
Yeah, it is. I'm curious about the policies which relate to changing the setbacks along riparian streams and rivers. It sounds to me like it's very loose, and you can go down to 20 feet without much difficulty. Could Ashley, maybe you help us understand that? How do they go about getting those setbacks or riparian buffers reduced?
Hi, this is Ashley Latorra. Okay, so a big portion of the Forest Practices Act deals with the streams and the riparian areas. And so I'll try to keep it simple here, but like I've offered before, I'd be willing to meet with anyone if they want a little more one-on-one in-depth tutorial on this. So you have a riparian management area. The first 20 feet is no harvest. So I tell the landowner, ribbon that off, count all the trees, measure all the conifer trees greater than 6 inches, measure diameter at breast height. If you meet the requirements of the Forest Practices Act, it says you have for tree retention in that zone, then theoretically you can clear cut from 21 out to the outside width of the riparian area, which is 50 feet, 70 feet, or 100 feet, depending on the size of the stream. If you want to make changes to the riparian rules, basically that has to be changed by the legislature. And basically the Forest Practices Act was just updated to make the buffers increase for salmon, steelhead, and bull trout streams. So they have wider buffers, more trees are required, more basal areas required along there. And so that update came, I think, started a few years ago in the Northwest Oregon area, and it's coming January 1st to Southern Oregon. Ted, does that answer your question, or do you have something a little more specific?
No, that's good. Thanks, Ashley.
Hi, so this is Mike Sinnott with ODFW again. I just wanted to piggyback on what Ashley was saying. So um, just because my focus is fish biology and fish habitat, I just want to point out that it really is outside the Forest Practices Act. It really is up to the county and up to all of you to come up with what you want as ordinances for riparian protection. So, I made the recommendation to bring the buffers up to the level of FPA because that would be an improvement, but it's really up to you if you want something more restrictive. There's other counties that we work with that have 50-foot setbacks where they're allowed to remove no trees but 50% of the vegetation. It would be totally within your purview to do a no-touch buffer and say, okay, we want this many feet and nothing gets done there without a variance or an exception. So just want to make it clear that there's two different things going on here. You've got the Forest Practices Act on commercial forest lands and for commercial activity, but really the only governing body that regulates riparian buffers outside of that is the counties and the cities. So that's really what you're tasked with here. That's it.
Thank you, Mike. Okay.
Julia?
Yes.
Carol Connell, do you have a map as graphic as this elk map that shows the commercial timberland in the county?
Oh, we could call it the zoning ordinance.
That's a good start.
It takes a minute to populate. Yeah, there you go. So all of this area that's white, it's not actually white, it's a light green. This is F80, that's forestry with an 80-acre minimum. Most all of that is going to be, well, I mean, it's zoned for commercial industrial timber. The darker green in here, this is AF, which is agriculture forestry. So these pockets of green, also an 80-acre minimum, are again very frequently used for industrial forestry, sometimes for agriculture. This also is the zones. This is part of the zoning where you see most of the requests that we have for template test dwellings and forest dwellings are in this AF zone. It's the easiest one to put a dwelling in, and as you can see, the way that it clusters around the transportation corridors, it's closest to utilities and other development. And then this lighter green in the middle here, this is OPR zoning for Saddle Mountain. We also have exclusive farm use zoning, and that's an 80-acre minimum as well. So that kind of gives you an idea about the extent of the county that's in some sort of commercial or private forestry or agricultural use.
Okay, so the setbacks from the streams in those cases would be, at this time, you're recommending be equal to or equate with the ODF setbacks?
Well, if in any of these zones, in any of the AF, the EFU, or the F80 zoning, if it's for commercial timber, then it's going to follow the Forest Practices Act and be covered by that. That would be Ashley's department regulating it, not the county.
Right. And then, but the county lands along the streams are zoned, large lots. I'm not quite sure where the county stream setbacks apply if I were looking at this map.
Carol, this is Ian Sisson. If I could jump in to try to help clarify. Linda's question, I think, was a good one, and she was asking, who regulates what activities. And so if the activity happening on a property is commercial forestry done under the Forest Practices Act, the county doesn't have a role in regulating that. But if it's anything else, then the county does have a role. So what Mike Sinnott was recommending was that we could use the same rules the Oregon Department of Forestry uses under the Forest Practices Act for non-commercial timber uses. Does that clarify it?
Yeah, that's what I thought, and yet you could also go further if you chose as a county.
Yes, exactly.
And I just want to know how much of the of our land in the county is under your jurisdiction and not ODF in terms of stream buffers. So
I think that would be really difficult to pinpoint.
Well, and I think this is Julia. I think it's going to overlap because it's the activity, not the land itself. It's the activity on the land. So the same land might be governed by the county if somebody's doing a template test dwelling, or it might be governed by the Forest Practices Act if they're harvesting timber. So there's an overlap there.
That's good. That helps.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So how are we doing here? It's 3 o'clock. We have more time if we want, if my committee members would like. If you have any of these goals and policies that you'd like to work on or get any more questions out, I don't want to turn this off if you guys still have more to ask about.
I hesitate to say one more word, but
Carol,
are you
go
talking
ahead.
Beaches and dunes, the very last goal 18, policy 12? Have you talked about that?
No, we have not. And I can bring that up if you'd like to give me just a moment. Okay, there we go. Removal of vegetation which provides wildlife habitat shall be limited. Unnecessary removal of shoreline vegetation shall be prohibited. That's the one you were asking about, Carol?
Yes, and it's my understanding that's an existing policy.
Yes.
From back in the 70s, and right now you don't have any recommended changes?
Well, we haven't really gotten to the goals and policies outside of Goal 5, but I did, we've been trying to kind of loop them in because fish and wildlife habitat and areas occur and have goals and policies strung out throughout the entire comprehensive plan. So we've been trying to sort of loop in the ones that occur in other goals. Certainly when we get to goal 18, we would bring this up again. We haven't discussed it today. Did you have something specific about it?
Well, I don't want to interfere with your schedule. I would just say, well, you have the experts here, and I can think of a couple things that this is pretty vague. Removal of vegetation shall be limited. I don't know what that means, and unnecessary removal is unclear to me what's unnecessary, and so that might be fleshed out. And then invasive species should be restricted to be planted because lots of shoreline dwellings have gardens or yards that affect the shoreline and the dunes and can spread holly and blackberries and you name it, Scotch broom. So some policies related to that. And then the other thought I have is, well, dune grading is going to continue to be an issue, at least in where the dunes are, all the way from Nicanicum up to Fort Stevens, I guess, on private lands. I don't think you're at that point, but that requires a pretty extensive process to be able to grade your dunes to, for instance, protect your views. And I think the state gets involved, but I don't see any reference to any limitations there. And this probably is the wrong place. So back to the wildlife and the vegetation, I think this could be expanded upon in the future if you do that, or maybe any input right now from the experts on the panel here. Could be useful.
Did we have anybody who wanted to respond to that?
Yeah, this is Dave. Yeah, certainly removal of the invasives, especially Scotch broom, but even shore pine, which typically comes in after the Scotch broom, is desirable. It doesn't provide any kind of real wildlife benefit. If you want to get right down to it, the beach grass is also non-native. So I don't know where you want to draw the line on that.
Dave, just out of curiosity, this is Julia. What is native?
So some of the things like the sand verbena and things like that, that when you start to dig into, you know, what's good for silver spot butterflies, what's good for snowy plover, things of that nature. Really, our dunes here used to be open sand and shifted all the time, but with you know, shoreline development, moving dunes aren't so compatible anymore. So you do have to kind of make some choices.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I'd say that Kathleen Sage is a great resource you have there on the coast about native, but he's right. The erosion control is probably more important. I think one of the grasses is American beach grass. The other one is European, and I can't remember which one is more native, but I think more than, I don't think we want to interfere with the erosion control, but I think the invasives are the problem, except the grass. And then, yeah, there are lots of things you could plant to attract butterflies and birds if you wanted to encourage that.
Okay, so maybe some of our committees would be wanting to make some sort of a goal or policy that encourages use of native plants and discourages the use of exotics or ornamentals. So something like that maybe might be useful, is what you're suggesting?
Yes.
Okay. Committee folks, anything more that you'd like to discuss? Anything more that you'd like to look at?
Julia, in the chat, we have a few more things that have come up in the past few minutes. Lisa Phipps said vegetation removal, depending upon its location on the dune, will also require coordination with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department.
Excellent point, yes.
Mike Sinnott said clarification or recommendation for both Goal 5 and Goal 18 is that vegetation protection should not apply to invasive species.
Okay.
Also a good point.
Yes.
And Nadia Gardner said, what about dune grading? That needs to be really fleshed out. Cannon Beach and Gearhart have been doing lots of work on this issue that could be built on.
Okay. So specifically, we're looking at wildlife habitat and fisheries habitat right now. Dune grading, I suspect we're going to really get into it with Goal 18, but that is definitely something to bookmark.
A couple more things just came in. Ashley Lertora says, I don't want to leave the impression that only 20 feet of RMA is left. I think that's riparian management area. Landowners can leave more than what is required by the Forest Practices Act. State foresters leave closer to 100 feet along all fish streams. And Linda Eierman wanted to know if the workshop is recorded. Yes, it is recorded, Linda. Whether the chat will be preserved, I do not know if GoToMeeting preserves chat.
But actually, this is Gail Hendrickson. I've been copying the chats as we've gone through because it will not preserve it. So yes, I do have the chat saved. I also wanted to talk just briefly, going back to stream buffers. And I think this came up at the beginning of the meeting. You know, aligning our stream buffers on lands where no commercial harvesting is occurring, I think is a sound request and a sound policy that would have some basis moving forward because it's structured off of an existing state law. As we work to move to larger stream buffers, if that's the those are the recommendations that the committees would like to make to the Board of Commissioners, then we need to think about what is it that we're going to accomplish with larger buffers. How is it going to impact property owners who now, if you went with a 200-foot buffer, may be potentially stripped of all use of their property, and other considerations like that. So it's going to be a balancing act between, you know, what is necessary and an improvement over what we have versus when we reach a point where we've stripped people of their property values. And it's a very fine line to have to walk, but I think starting with aligning our regulations with Forest Practices Act would bring us all up basically to the same point, and I think it's a very strong starting point. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail.
And just to add on to that, Gail, I would put the wording something about being the same as the FPA standards or something, and not writing in specific distances, since the Forest Practices Act goes through changes more often than this document will.
That's a good point too. Thank you, Ashley.
Yes, absolutely.
This is Connie Moore. Are there ways that we could compensate as a county private owners? Because, you know, I'm a private owner myself. A way to compensate them so that we can manage the big picture in a much healthier way. And I'm still thinking of the situation on Hamlet Road.
Connie, this is Gail Hendrickson. Are you asking if the county could establish a fund to perhaps purchase conservation easements or property from people? I'm not sure I understood your question.
Well, I think actually in my mind, my thoughts on the compensation were totally open, meaning, you know, I mean, it might be its own idea that needs to be, or set of ideas that need to be explored, but I don't want to hurt a private, you know, property owner unnecessarily. The problem is that as we slowly educate ourselves environmentally, there's just, if as a community, as a county, if we can come together to provide better protection and also provide some compensation to the landowners in some way. You know, the cases are so individual in some regard, but you know, it's just a flooding a bunch of old cars into the North Fork of the Nehalem. It's just not a good thing.
Okay, Connie. So I know that we've talked about this a lot in our Elsie Jewell committee, and I'm not sure quite how it's tying in with our discussion today, but I think this might be something that we want to talk about over the next few meetings. We'll be getting some new members in starting in January, and getting some different perspectives. So I think that would be a good time for us to come back to that one at our committee level.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to drag things down here.
Nope, that's okay.
This is Ian Sisson. We got a request from Nadia Gardner in the chat to give an explanation of Measure 49 and 37, which deal with takings.
And maybe Nadia, this is Julia, maybe Nadia is responding to Connie's question regarding compensation. Just so everyone knows, Measure 37 does not exist anymore. Measure 49 superseded it, but it has to do with compensation for landowners who basically own property and have a certain set of rights, a certain bundle of sticks of rights, and then land use laws change while they own the property and take some of those rights away or take rights away. So basically the land use laws change while somebody owns the property, and they have the ability to file a Measure 49 claim with the state of Oregon for some sort of compensation. Typically what we see is people applying for the ability to put more dwellings on their property than currently permitted by zoning. And then so that's an example of Measure 49. The state has a pretty good website that explains it quite a bit. So I'm not really sure, Nadia, what you might have been looking for there. She's put the Measure 49 section up in the chat box. The state's website explains it pretty well, but a Measure 49 claim is filed through the state of Oregon. I believe it has a 2-year window. So if the zoning changes on your property and removes a right that you might have had, you have a 2-year window to file a Measure 47 or Measure 49 claim. Pardon me.
This is Nadia. I'm not an expert in this by any means, but it's my understanding that it's not just if your zoning changes, but it's like if, for example, like the entire property is now a riparian area and you're unable to build there, you can either get compensated or have that new law be waived. Isn't that right? And so, and it's like if you already own the property. And so then if you sell your property or it goes on to somebody else, then it no longer, that's not an opportunity anymore.
It's similar to that. This is Julia. It's similar to that. There are, I believe, some rights that go to heirs, and so I know that part's more complicated. So I don't know exactly.
It just gets to, I think, often when you're talking about like, takings or compensation, I think it's really important that everybody understand that law and that already exists, so that the need for the county, for example, to have, necessarily a fund like that or do the conservation easements, which really, I mean, it would be astronomically expensive for the county to do something like that. That's the opportunity that people have.
Okay, thank you.
This is Ashley Latorre. I didn't think there was any money in that compensation fund to speak of, but I haven't kept up on Measure 49 in the last few years.
I think most of the time they just waive the rule, so it ends up not compensating. People don't get paid, but they, still do it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, goals or policies, anyone? Well, hearing nothing, I would like very much to thank everyone. Oh, we have a comment from Lisa. We can have a quick workshop on Measure 49 in the near future if people are concerned. That's an excellent idea. And we can do that, and there is lots of information available. So yes, let's put that on the schedule. I'd like to thank everybody who came today, and our speakers and our local experts, our Salem experts, folks up and down the coast. Thank you, everyone. If there isn't anything else, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. as we indicated, this has been recorded. It will be available on the county's website probably by tomorrow. It won't make it up there today. It's going to take a while to go through its gyrations and record. Let's see. I got, whoops, go ahead, Gail.
Julia, I just want to reiterate as well your thanks to all the state folks who showed up today and all the committee members who have taken their time today. And I really want to thank Julia because I know she put a lot of effort and time into coordinating this and pulling everything together. And so I appreciate her help as well very much. And Ian, who helped take notes as well and facilitate.
Ian and Gail, thank you very, very much, both of you. But my state folks, thank you. My committee folks, thank you. With that, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording.
While you're doing that, my thanks to Julia and everyone as well. From the committee standpoint, I think this was really helpful.